Four young musicians board a private jet in 1981 dreaming of stardom. Within hours, they vanish without a trace. For 19 years, their families live with unbearable questions. Then, from the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the truth finally surfaces, and it's more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. What you're about to hear involves murder, betrayal, and a conspiracy that reaches from small-town California to international criminal organizations. This is the story of Crimson Fire Line and the dark secret that destroyed everything. Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the most mysterious and shocking true stories that defy explanation. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell because today's story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and survival. Helen Hayes had learned to live with grief. At 63, she'd spent nearly 2 decades in the quiet coastal town of Crescent Harbor, California, trying to find peace after losing her son Zane in 1981. Zane was the lead vocalist of Crimson Fire Line, a promising rock band that had just started gaining local recognition. But on this particular afternoon in the year 2000, a phone call would shatter the fragile peace she'd built. "Mrs. Hayes, this is Lieutenant Commander Jackson from the U.S. Navy. We've recovered what we believe to be the private jet your son and his band were on when they disappeared." Helen's first instinct was disbelief. After 19 years, she'd given up hope. But this wasn't a prank call. The Navy, working with deep-sea expedition scientists, had pulled something extraordinary from 12,000 feet below the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Martinez, the lead expedition scientist, explained how their sonar had detected unusual metallic reflections while exploring hydrothermal vents. What they found was a ghost from the past, the band's private jet, remarkably preserved in the deep, cold waters. When Helen arrived at port, Holston Naval Base, she wasn't alone. The families of the other band members were there too. Patricia and Donald Maddox, whose son Trent played bass guitar, and representatives for Derek Clean, the rhythm guitarist whose parents had passed away years earlier. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about that terrible day in 1981. The plane sat before them like a time capsule, its white fuselage streaked with rust, seaweed hanging from the wings like funeral shrouds. But it was what was inside that would change everything. 3 body bags lay respectfully arranged on tarps. Inside, they found Trent Maddox, still wearing his distinctive red leopard pants, and Derek Clean, identified by his leather vest and belt buckle. But these weren't accident victims. Gunshot wounds. All victims show evidence of gunfire. This wasn't a plane crash. This was murder. But here's where the story takes an even more sinister turn. Zane Hayes and Ricky Moreno, the lead guitarist, were nowhere to be found. Their bodies weren't in the wreckage. Agent Dana Truitt of the FBI took over what had now become a criminal investigation. The evidence pointed to something far worse than a tragic accident. There were additional bodies on the plane, men in expensive suits, suggesting this wasn't just about 4 young musicians from California. Helen clung to a desperate hope. If Zane's body wasn't there, maybe, just maybe, her son was still alive somewhere. But as Helen would soon discover, sometimes hope can lead you down the darkest paths imaginable. After the shocking discovery at the naval base, Helen tried to return to her quiet life. But someone was watching her, someone who knew things about her routine that should have been impossible to know. At a bus stop, a cold-eyed stranger approached her with words that chilled her to the bone. "Saw you on the news this morning. Your son, thought he'd be dead by now, probably sinking at the bottom of some trench." This wasn't random cruelty. This man was following her, studying her, waiting for something. And when Helen tried to call her estranged husband Malcolm to tell him about the plane's discovery, the stalker made his move. In a terrifying confrontation at a supermarket, the man revealed he knew impossible details about her life, her doctor appointments, her grocery runs, even where her husband lived. But then he said something that stopped Helen's heart. "The lighthouse keeper's daughter waits by the shore, counting stars that fell before." Those were lyrics from an unfinished song Zane had been writing just before he disappeared, a song no one else had ever heard. a song that proved this man somehow knew her son was alive. What followed was a nightmare Helen could never have imagined. Forced to swallow packages of drugs, kidnapped and transported across unknown borders, she found herself trapped in a world of human trafficking and international crime. But the worst revelation was yet to come. After what felt like an eternity of terror, Helen found herself in a warehouse that operated as the headquarters of a brutal criminal organization. The man in charge was Alex Sulafov, a Russian crime boss who had been using the missing musicians for nearly 2 decades. In a horrifying scene, Helen witnessed executions and realized the full scope of the evil she'd stumbled into. But then, impossibly, she saw a face she recognized. Ricky Moreno, Zane's bandmate, alive but transformed into something she barely recognized. And then, in a moment that defied 19 years of grief and hope, Helen came face to face with her son. Zane was alive, but he was no longer the innocent young musician who had boarded that plane in 1981. He was harder, older, shaped by nearly 2 decades of survival in a world of violence and crime. Mother, no one can know we're related. This is our life now. The reunion Helen had dreamed of for 19 years was nothing like she'd imagined. Her son had become part of the very criminal organization that had destroyed his band, forced into compliance through threats against her life. But the warehouse was about to become a battleground. Edric Canvo, the man who had kidnapped Helen, was making his move to take over the organization. In the chaos that followed, Helen made a desperate decision that would change everything. She called the FBI. What happened next was a nightmare of violence and sacrifice. As FBI tactical teams stormed the warehouse, Edric turned his gun on Helen for calling for help. In a moment that defined everything, Zane threw himself between his mother and the bullet. The son who had been lost to crime for 19 years proved that somewhere deep inside, the boy Helen had raised still existed. He took a bullet meant for her, nearly dying in the process. Ricky Moreno, driven by his own guilt and grief, eliminated the immediate threat. But the damage was done. As paramedics fought to save Zane's life, the full truth finally emerged. Malcolm Hayes, Helen's own husband and the band's manager, had orchestrated everything. The celebration trip had been a trap. He had planned to force the young musicians into money laundering for criminal organizations, using their tours and merchandise sales to clean drug money. When Zane and Trent refused, violence erupted at 30,000 feet. Trent and Derek were murdered. Zane was spared only because he was Malcolm's son, but forced into compliance through threats against his mother's life. For 19 years, while Helen grieved and Malcolm pretended to be broken by mental illness, Zane and Ricky had been trapped in a world of crime, doing whatever it took to survive and protect the people they loved. Today, Zane Hayes remains in a coma, fighting for his life after taking a bullet meant for his mother. Malcolm Hayes faces federal charges for his role in orchestrating the 1981 murders and the subsequent criminal conspiracy. Ricky Moreno is cooperating with federal authorities, his testimony crucial to dismantling what remains of the criminal organization that held them captive for nearly 2 decades. Helen Hayes sits by her son's hospital bed, finally reunited with the child she lost, but forever changed by the truth of what that reunion cost. Sometimes the answers we seek come at a price we never imagined we'd have to pay. This story reminds us that behind every missing person case, behind every unsolved mystery, there are real families living with unimaginable questions. And sometimes the truth is more complex and heartbreaking than we could ever imagine. What do you think about this incredible story? Could you have survived what Zane and Ricky endured? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it kept you on the edge of your seat, subscribe for more incredible true stories, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Until next time, remember, the truth is often stranger and more terrifying than fiction.